The steam from my morning coffee curled upward in the November air, dissipating against the concrete ceiling of what had been my home for 3 years. The garage smelled of motor oil and dampness, a persistent mustardness that had seeped into my clothes, my hair, my very bones. I adjusted the space heater with my bare foot, feeling the familiar jolt of cold concrete against my soul. 62 years old, and this was what my life had become. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I wrapped my fingers around the chipped ceramic mug, a garage sale find from better days, and listened to the rain drumming against the metal door. Through the single window, I could see the main house, where my eldest son, Norman, lived with his wife, Maxine. Their warm yellow kitchen light glowed like a beacon I was no longer welcome to approach. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd bought this property 15 years ago, when my late husband, Frank, was still alive, and my children still pretended to care. The plan had been simple: convert the garage into a cozy mother-in-law suite where I could live independently while staying close to family. Frank had started the electrical work himself before the cancer took him. After his funeral, Norman had looked at the half-finished space and shrugged. "It's fine for now, Mom. We'll finish it later." Later never came. My phone buzzed against the makeshift nightstand, a plastic storage container covered with a tea towel. A text from my daughter, Anna. "Kids have soccer tournament this weekend. Won't be able to visit." I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. This was the fourth weekend in a row. Anna lived 20 minutes away in her McMansion with her husband, Roy, a successful orthodontist who'd made it clear from day one that I wasn't his problem. Their visits had dwindled from weekly to monthly to these polite cancellations that felt more like relief than regret. The garage door shuddered as someone walked past outside. Through the window, I watched Maxine hurry toward her silver SUV, designer purse clutched against her chest. She didn't glance toward my window. She never did. 3 years of living 30 feet from each other, and she treated me like a ghost, haunting her perfect suburban life. I remembered the day I'd first suggested moving into the garage. Norman had been going through his divorce from his first wife, struggling with child support payments and threatening to lose the house. "Just temporarily," I'd said, selling my own small but comfortable home to help them avoid foreclosure, until you get back on your feet. The money had disappeared into their joint account like water into sand. New furniture, a kitchen renovation, Maxine's car, Norman's tools, always another expense that was more important than insulation or proper heating for their 62-year-old mother. I stood and walked to the corner where I'd set up my kitchen. A mini fridge, a hot plate, and a toaster oven arranged on a folding table. The setup reminded me of my college dorm room. Except at 19, I'd had hope. At 62, I felt like I was serving a prison sentence for the crime of loving my children too much. The concrete floor was so cold that wearing slippers was mandatory year-round. I'd bought throw rugs from the dollar store, but they did little to warm the space. In winter, I could see my breath in the mornings. In summer, the metal roof turned the garage into an oven. The single window provided minimal ventilation, and the overhead fluorescent light cast everything in harsh, institutional shadows. My bed was a twin mattress on a metal frame, surrounded by plastic storage containers holding my entire life. Clothes in one, books in another, keepsakes in a third. The life I'd built over 6 decades compressed into a space smaller than most people's walk-in closets. I heard Norman's truck starting up. He'd be heading to his job at the construction company, where he made decent money, but somehow never enough to help finish his mother's living space. Through the window, I watched him back out of the driveway without a glance toward the garage. Maxine had already left for her part-time job at the boutique, a hobby job that paid for her manicures and yoga classes. The silence that followed was deafening. I walked to the plastic container where I kept my important papers. Inside, Beneath my Social Security card and Medicare information was a manila envelope I'd been carrying for 6 months. It contained the final paperwork for my teacher's pension, money I'd been saving for a real emergency. The emergency had finally arrived, though not in the way I'd expected. My teaching career had spanned 34 years. I taught third grade at Jefferson Elementary, watching generations of children learn to read, helping them navigate playground conflicts and family troubles. Parents trusted me with their most precious possessions. I'd attended graduations, weddings, baby showers. I'd been someone that mattered. Now, I was someone who lived in a garage. I opened my laptop, a refurbished model I'd bought after my old one died, and began researching property listings. Not for apartments or senior housing, but for something else entirely. Something that had been brewing in my mind for weeks, taking shape like a photograph in Developer Solution. The townhouse listings in Millbrook, 30 minutes away, were surprisingly affordable. The area had been revitalized in recent years with young professionals moving in, alongside retirees who wanted walkable neighborhoods and community gardens. I could afford something there, especially if I liquidated my pension fund. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like the first warm breath I'd taken in years. I scrolled through photos of a 3-bedroom townhouse with hardwood floors and a small backyard. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The living room had a fireplace and built-in bookshelves. It was everything this garage wasn't. Warm, inviting, dignified. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Anna. BTW, we're doing Thanksgiving at Roy's parents' this year. His mom insists on hosting. You understand, right? I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. This was the 4th weekend in a row. Anna lived 20 minutes away in her McMansion with her husband, Roy, a successful orthodontist who'd made it clear from day one that I wasn't his problem. Their visits had dwindled from weekly to monthly to these polite cancellations that felt more like relief than regret. The garage door shuddered as someone walked past outside. Through the window, I watched Maxine hurry toward her silver SUV, designer purse clutched against her chest. She didn't glance toward my window. She never did. 3 years of living 30 feet from each other, and she treated me like a ghost, haunting her perfect suburban life. I remembered the day I'd first suggested moving into the garage. Norman had been going through his divorce from his first wife, struggling with child support payments and threatening to lose the house. Just temporarily, I'd said, selling my own small but comfortable home to help them avoid foreclosure, until you get back on your feet. The money had disappeared into their joint account like water into sand. New furniture, a kitchen renovation, Maxine's car, Norman's tools. Always another expense that was more important than insulation or proper heating for their 62-year-old mother. I stood and walked to the corner where I'd set up my kitchen. A mini fridge, a hot plate, and the toaster oven, arranged on a folding table. The setup reminded me of my college dorm room. Except at 19, I'd had hope. At 62, I felt like I was serving a prison sentence for the crime of loving my children too much. The concrete floor was so cold that wearing slippers was mandatory year-round. I'd bought throw rugs from the dollar store, but they did little to warm the space. In winter, I could see my breath in the mornings. In summer, the metal roof turned the garage into an oven. The single window provided minimal ventilation, and the overhead fluorescent light cast everything in harsh, institutional shadows. My bed was a twin mattress on a metal frame, surrounded by plastic storage containers holding my entire life. Clothes in one, books in another, keepsakes in a third. The life I'd built over 6 decades compressed into a space smaller than most people's walk-in closets. I heard Norman's truck starting up. He'd be heading to his job at the construction company, where he made decent money, but somehow never enough to help finish his mother's living space. Through the window, I watched him back out of the driveway without a glance toward the garage. Maxine had already left for her part-time job at the boutique, a hobby job that paid for her manicures and yoga classes. The silence that followed was deafening. I walked to the plastic container where I kept my important papers. Inside, beneath my Social Security card and Medicare information, was a manila envelope I'd been carrying for 6 months. It contained the final paperwork for my teacher's pension, money I'd been saving for a real emergency. The emergency had finally arrived, though not in the way I'd expected. My teaching career had spanned 34 years. I taught 3rd grade at Jefferson Elementary, watching generations of children learn to read, helping them navigate playground conflicts and family troubles. Parents trusted me with their most precious possession. An archway into a space that made my makeshift garage setup seem even more pathetic in comparison. Granite countertops, a farmhouse sink, cabinets that actually closed properly, and there's a breakfast nook that gets beautiful morning light. I ran my fingers along the smooth countertop, imagining myself making coffee here. Real coffee from a proper machine instead of instant powder mixed with hot water from a camping kettle. The breakfast nook overlooked a small garden where the previous owner had planted roses and herbs. The living room has a working fireplace, Patricia said, as if reading my thoughts about warmth. And the upstairs has 3 bedrooms, though I imagine you'd use one as an office or craft room. 3 bedrooms. For years, I'd been sleeping in a space smaller than most people's bathrooms. The master bedroom had an ensuite bathroom with a soaking tub and separate shower. I could take long baths again, something I'd given up when my only option became a shared bathroom in the main house that Maxine had made clear was an inconvenience. The neighborhood's wonderful, Patricia continued as we toured the 2nd floor. There's a community garden 2 blocks over, and the library has an active book club. Lots of retirees who've moved here for the walkability and the sense of community. Community. The word hit me like a physical blow. When had I last felt part of a community? When had I last had neighbors who knew my name, who might notice if I didn't pick up my mail for a few days? What's the asking price? I asked, though I'd already memorized the listing details. $230,000. It's fair for the market, and I think there's room for negotiation given that it's been sitting empty for a month. I did the math in my head. My pension fund had grown to nearly $300,000 over the years, money I'd been saving for retirement emergencies. This qualified as an emergency, though not the kind I'd imagined. I could buy the house outright and still have money left over for furniture, utilities, and living expenses. I'll take it, I said. Patricia blinked. Don't you want to see a few more properties? Think it over? I've been thinking for 3 years, I said. I'll take it. The paperwork process moved faster than I'd expected. Patricia connected me with a lawyer who specialized in cash purchases, and within a week, I had a closing date. December 15th. I would own my own home again before Christmas. But first, I had to tell my children. I chose a Sunday afternoon when I knew Norman would be home, probably watching football in his climate-controlled living room while I shivered in the garage. I knocked on the back door. The front door felt too formal, too much like a stranger visiting. Maxine answered, her face immediately arranging itself into its usual expression of polite inconvenience. Hi, Elizabeth. Norman's watching the game. I need to speak with both of you. She hesitated, probably calculating whether she could get away with claiming he was busy. Okay, come in. The warmth of their kitchen enveloped me like a hug I hadn't received in years. Norman looked up from his position on the couch, remote in hand, clearly annoyed at the interruption. What's up, Mom? I'd rehearsed this moment in my head dozens of times, but standing in the kitchen I'd helped pay for, looking at my son who'd forgotten I existed, the words came out differently than I'd planned. I'm moving out. Norman muted the television. Maxine's hand stilled on the dish towel she'd been folding. Moving out? Norman's voice carried a note of confusion. Where? I bought a townhouse in Millbrook. I closed on December 15th. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could see Norman's brain working, trying to process this information. Maxine's face had gone carefully blank the way it did when she was trying to hide her true feelings. "You bought a house," Norman finally said. "How? I mean, do you have money for that?" The question stung, though I'd expected it. "I have my pension fund. I'm using it to buy the house outright." "But that's your retirement money," Maxine said. And for a moment, I almost believed she was concerned about my welfare. "I'm retired," I said, "and I'm using my retirement money to buy a retirement home." Norman stood up from the couch, his face reddening. "Mom, this is crazy. You can't just... You live here. This is your home." "No," I said quietly. "This is your home. I live in your garage." "That's temporary. It's been 3 years, Norman. We've been meaning to finish it properly. You know that money's just been tight." I looked around the kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, at the living room with its leather sectional and 75-inch TV, at Maxine's designer purse sitting on the counter, probably worth more than what I'd spent on groceries in the past 6 months. "I'm sure it has been," I said. Maxine stepped forward, and I saw something flicker across her face. Not concern, but calculation. "Elizabeth, maybe we should talk about this more. I mean, buying a house is a big decision. Are you sure you're thinking clearly?" The condescension in her tone was like a slap. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." "But what about us?" Norman asked. And there it was, the real question. Not, what about your happiness, your dignity, your future? What about us? What about you? "Well, I mean, if you're not here and something happens to the house, or we need help with the mortgage." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Are you asking me to stay so you can continue using me as a financial safety net? That's not what I meant." "That's exactly what you meant." Norman's face flushed darker. "Mom, that's not fair. We let you live here." "Let me..." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "Let me live in a garage in exchange for financing your lifestyle." "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Norman? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I gave up my home to save yours, and you repaid me by treating me like an inconvenient tenant." Maxine's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw the flash of anger underneath. "We never asked you to sell your house. You were going to lose this one. That was our problem to solve." "You're right," I said. "It was. And now my living situation is my problem to solve." I turned to leave, but Norman's voice stopped me. "Mom, wait. Let's talk about this rationally. Maybe we can work something out. Finish the garage properly. Make it more comfortable." I turned back to face him. "With what money?" "We could take out a loan." "Norman." My voice was quiet, but it cut through his stammering. "I'm not asking you to fix the garage. I'm telling you I'm leaving." "But why?" Maxine asked. And for the first time, she sounded genuinely confused. "I don't understand why you'd want to leave." I stared at her. This woman who'd lived 30 feet from me for 3 years without once inviting me for coffee, who'd planted a garden in the space where I'd hoped to build a deck, who'd made it clear in 1,000 small ways that I was unwelcome in the life she'd built with my son. "Because I want to be warm," I said simply. I left them standing in their kitchen, Norman's mouth opening and closing like a fish. Maxine's face carefully composed, but her eyes sharp with calculation. I walked back across the yard to my garage, my breath visible in the cold air. Inside, I sat on my twin bed and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Anna's number. "Hi, honey," she answered, her voice distracted. "What's up?" "I wanted to let you know I'm moving." "Moving?" Her voice sharpened with interest. "Where?" "I bought a townhouse in Millbrook. I close next month." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Anna, I'm here." I'm just surprised. Why are you moving? Because I want to live in a real home again. But you have a home. You're with Norman and Maxine. I live in their garage. But that's just temporary. I closed my eyes. It's been 3 years. Well, maybe it's time they finished it properly. Maybe it's time I stopped waiting for them to care about my comfort. Another long silence. Then, Mom, are you okay? You sound angry. I'm not angry, I said, and realized it was true. I'm done. After I hung up, I sat in the gray light of the garage and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. In 3 weeks, I would wake up in my own bedroom, make coffee in my own kitchen, take a hot bath in my own tub, and my children would wake up in their houses, warm and comfortable, just as they had always had. The only difference would be that I wouldn't be there to catch them if they fell. The closing took place on a Tuesday morning that felt like stepping through a doorway into a different life. I signed papers at a long mahogany table in the lawyer's office, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what I was doing. Patricia sat beside me, occasionally pointing out important clauses, but mostly just bearing witness to what she'd recognized as more than just a house.
More than a real estate transaction. Congratulations, she said as I accepted the keys. You're officially a homeowner again. The keys felt warm in my palm, heavier than they should have been. 2 keys for the front door, 1 for the back, and a small brass one for the mailbox. Such simple objects, but they represented something I'd forgotten. I could have autonomy. I drove directly to Maple Street, my few possessions loaded into the back of my ancient Honda Civic. 3 years of life compressed into 6 boxes and 2 suitcases. Everything that had mattered to me before Norman's financial crisis had been sold, donated, or absorbed into their household. I was starting over with less than I'd had at 25, but I felt richer than I had in years. The townhouse welcomed me with afternoon light streaming through clean windows. I set my boxes in the living room and walked through each room slowly, reacquainting myself with the luxury of space. In the kitchen, I made my first pot of coffee, using the machine I'd bought on my way over, a small splurge that felt revolutionary after 3 years of instant coffee. The silence was different here. In the garage, silence meant isolation, the oppressive quiet of being forgotten. Here, it meant peace. I could hear birds outside, the distant hum of traffic, the normal sounds of a neighborhood where people lived full lives. My phone buzzed. A text from Norman. "Mom, can we talk? This feels wrong." I deleted it without responding. The next few days blurred together in a haze of unpacking and discovery. I bought a bed, a real bed, with a headboard and everything. I purchased towels that matched, dishes that weren't chipped, a reading chair for the living room. Each purchase felt like an act of rebellion against the woman who'd accepted table scraps for 3 years. On Friday, I was arranging books on the built-in shelves when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman about my age holding a casserole dish. "Hi, I'm Helen Green," she said when I opened the door. "I live next door. I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." She was small and energetic, with silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and paint-stained fingers that suggested an artistic hobby. Her smile was genuine, not the calculated politeness I'd grown accustomed to. "I'm Elizabeth," I said, accepting the dish. "This is so thoughtful." "Tuna noodle casserole," Helen said, "my grandmother's recipe. I figured you might not be up for cooking yet, with all the moving chaos." I invited her in for coffee, and she accepted with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoyed meeting new people. As we sat in my kitchen, she told me about the neighborhood, the community garden, the book club that met at the library. "Are you retired?" "Recently," I said. "I taught 3rd grade for 34 years. Oh, wonderful. We need more teachers in the book club. Everyone else is either a retired accountant or a former middle manager. We could use someone who actually knows how to discuss literature. It had been so long since someone had valued my professional background that I almost didn't know how to respond. In the garage, I'd been just Norman's aging mother, a burden to be managed. Here, I was a retired teacher with something to offer. "I'd love to join," I said. Helen's face lit up. "Perfect. We meet Thursday evenings. This month we're reading The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Have you read it?" I hadn't, but I made a mental note to pick up a copy. When had I last read for pleasure? In the garage, I'd been too cold in winter and too tired in summer to focus on anything beyond survival. After Helen left, I sat in my living room with her casserole warming in my oven and felt something I'd almost forgotten. Belonging. Not the desperate conditional belonging I'd sought from my children, but the easy acceptance of someone who'd simply shown up with food and friendship. My phone rang. Anna's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, honey," I answered. "Mom, I talked to Norman. He's really upset about this whole moving thing." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you? Because you sound different. Cold." I considered her words. "I'm not cold, Anna. I'm just not desperate anymore." "Desperate? Mom? What are you talking about? I spent 3 years living in a garage, begging for scraps of attention from my own children. I was desperate for someone to care about me, to include me, to remember I existed." "We cared." "No, you didn't. You cared about the money I'd given you, the security my presence provided, but you didn't care about me." "That's not fair." "Isn't it? When was the last time you invited me to dinner? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing?" The silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, probably formulating an excuse or explanation. "I've been busy with the kids." "I know," I said, gently. "Everyone's been busy. That's why I found my own life." "But what about us? What about family?" "What about it? Don't you want to be part of our lives?" I looked around my warm, bright kitchen, at the casserole dish from my new neighbor, at the book club recommendations sitting on my counter. I am part of a life. Mine. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my own home and felt something settle in my chest. Not grief, exactly, but a kind of peaceful finality. I'd spent 3 years grieving the loss of the mother I'd thought I was, the one who was needed, valued, central to her family's happiness. Now, I was discovering the woman I actually was, someone who could make friends, join book clubs, create a life that didn't revolve around other people's needs. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own room, with sunlight streaming through windows I'd chosen. I made coffee in my own kitchen and sat at my own table reading the local newspaper I'd subscribed to. Small pleasures, but they felt enormous after 3 years of grateful acceptance of whatever scraps I'd been offered. My phone buzzed. A text from Norman. "Mom, Maxine wants to apologize. Can we take you to lunch?" I stared at the message, feeling nothing. Not anger, not hope, not even curiosity. Just the flat recognition that this was how it would be now. Crisis management, damage control, the sudden attention that came only when they realized they might lose something valuable. I typed back, "I'm busy today." It was true. I had plans to visit the community garden, to introduce myself to the librarian, to buy groceries from my own kitchen. I had a life to build. Another text arrived almost immediately. "What about this weekend?" I deleted it without responding. On Sunday, I was planting herbs in my small backyard when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the gate, I could see Norman's truck. My stomach tightened reflexively.
3 years of conditioning to anticipate his moods, his needs, his demands. But I didn't stop planting. I pressed the basil seedling into the soil and watered it carefully, taking my time. Let him wait. Let him wonder. Let him experience for once the uncertainty of not knowing if he was welcome. The doorbell rang. I ignored it. It rang again, longer this time, then knocking. "Mom, I know you're here. Your car's in the driveway." I continued planting. Rosemary next, then thyme. I would have fresh herbs for cooking, something I dreamed about in the garage but never been able to achieve. The knocking became pounding. "Mom, open the door. We need to talk." I stood up, brushed the soil from my hands, and walked to the front door. Through the peephole, I could see Norman's face, red with frustration and what looked like genuine distress. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. "Finally," he said, pushing past me into my foyer, "I didn't invite you in." He stopped, turning to look at me with surprise. "What?" "I didn't invite you in, Norman. This is my home." "I'm your son." "Yes, and this is my home. Being my son doesn't give you the right to push past me and invite yourself in." He stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. "Mom, what's gotten into you?" "Dignity," I said simply. "Look, I know you're upset about the garage situation. I'm not upset, Norman. I solved the problem by running away. By taking care of myself." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was frustrated and looking for someone else to fix his problems. "Mom, this is crazy. You can't just cut us out of your life." "I'm not cutting you out. I'm just not making you the center of my universe anymore." "But we're your family." "Yes, and you'll always be my family. But I won't be your safety net anymore." Something flickered in his eyes, not understanding, but the first glimpse of real consequence. "What do you mean?" "I mean
Get back to my gardening." He stood in my foyer looking lost and young despite his 43 years. "Mom, please, can't we work this out?" "There's nothing to work out. I'm exactly where I want to be." After he left, I returned to my herbs and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of standing my ground, not out of anger or spite, but from a place of calm certainty about my own worth. The basil would grow strong in the soil. So would I. February arrived with an unexpected snowstorm that blanketed Millbrook in pristine white silence. I woke in my warm bedroom, watched the snow falling outside my window, and felt something approaching contentment. The radiator hummed steadily, the house held its heat, and I had nowhere I needed to be except exactly where I was. In the garage, snow days had been exercises in survival, the heater space struggling against the cold, the concrete floor becoming even more brutal underfoot, the dampness that seemed to seep into my bones. Now I made coffee in my kitchen, wrapped myself in a thick robe, and settled into my reading chair with The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. The book club had become one of my favorite parts of the week. Helen had introduced me to 5 other women, all retired professionals who'd found their way to Millbrook for the same reasons I had: the desire for a community, dignity, and a life that belonged to them. We met at the library on Thursday evenings, but our conversations had begun spilling over into coffee dates and impromptu dinners. "You're glowing," Helen had said at our last meeting. "I know that sounds ridiculous, but you look like someone who's finally gotten enough sleep." She wasn't wrong. I was sleeping 8 hours a night in my comfortable bed, waking naturally instead of to the sound of car doors slamming or Maxine's high heels clicking across the driveway. I was eating regular meals, reading books, taking walks around the neighborhood, simple pleasures that felt revolutionary after 3 years of mere survival. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a text from Anna.
Kids are asking about Grandma. When can we visit your new place? I stared at the message, feeling nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just the flat recognition of a pattern I'd seen too many times before. The children, my grandchildren, were being deployed as emotional leverage. It was a strategy that would have worked 6 months ago when I was desperate for any connection to my family. I typed back, "When you're ready to visit me, not my house." My phone rang almost immediately. Anna's name on the screen. "Mom, what does that mean?" "It means I'm not interested in being a tourist attraction for your children. If you want to visit, you're welcome, but I'm not performing grandmotherhood for your convenience." I just thought the kids would like to see where you live now." "The kids haven't seen me in 4 months, Anna. They don't know where I live because you haven't brought them to visit." "I've been busy." "You've been busy for 3 years." The silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, probably formulating another excuse or explanation. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening to you. You're different, cold." "I'm not cold. I'm just not desperate anymore." "You keep saying that, but I don't know what it means." I looked around my living room, my books on the shelves, my plants thriving in the sunlight, my comfortable chair where I spent my evenings reading instead of staring at concrete walls. "It means I don't need you to love me anymore," I said quietly. That's a horrible thing to say. It's a liberating thing to say. I spent 3 years begging for scraps of attention from my own children. Now I have a life full of people who actually want to spend time with me. What people? Friends, neighbors, people who see me as more than a problem to be managed. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my home and felt something I'd never experienced before. Genuine indifference to my children's approval. Not the bitter anger I'd carried for months, but simple disinterest in their emotional manipulation. The snow continued falling outside, and I thought about the woman I'd been in the garage. Cold, desperate, grateful for any acknowledgement of her existence. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I'd left behind along with the concrete floors and fluorescent lights. On Thursday, despite the snow, book club met as scheduled. The library had a cozy meeting room with soft lighting and comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Helen arrived with homemade cookies, as she always did, and Martha brought her famous hot chocolate. "How's everyone adjusting to the snow?" asked Linda, our unofficial group leader. "I love it," I said, surprising myself with the enthusiasm in my voice. "I actually looked forward to it." "That's because you have proper heating now," Helen said with a knowing smile. She was the only one who knew the full story of my garage years, and she'd become fiercely protective of my newfound independence. "Speaking of heating," said Joyce, "has anyone heard from Elizabeth's family lately?" I'd shared some of my situation with the group, not all of it, but enough that they understood why I'd moved to Millbrook. They'd become my chosen family, the support system I'd never had. "They're starting to realize I'm not coming back," I said. "The panic is setting in." "Good," said Helen with surprising vehemence. "Let them panic. Maybe they'll finally understand what they lost." We discussed the book for an hour, but the conversation inevitably drifted to our own lives. These women had become my confidants, my sounding board, my reminder that I was worth more than the treatment I'd accepted for too long. "You know what I realized?" said Martha, who'd been divorced for 10 years. "We spent so much of our lives making ourselves smaller so other people could feel bigger. I'm done with that." "Amen," said Linda. "I spent 40 years tiptoeing around my husband's moods. Now I eat ice cream for breakfast if I want to." We laughed, but there was truth in the humor. We were all women who spent decades managing other people's emotions, and now we were learning to prioritize our own. After the meeting, Helen and I walked to her car together, our breath visible in the cold air. "You're handling this beautifully," she said. "I know it's not easy." "It's easier than I expected," I admitted. "I thought I'd miss them more." You missed the idea of them, the family you thought you had. She was right. I'd grieved the loss of the loving, grateful children I imagined I'd raised, but I didn't miss the reality of being ignored, used, and discarded when convenient. The next morning, I woke to find my driveway had been plowed. I hadn't arranged for snow removal, but my neighbor Tom had apparently included my driveway when he'd cleared his own. When I knocked on his door to thank him, he waved off my gratitude. "That's what neighbors do," he said simply. Neighbors, not family obligations or guilt-induced favors, but the simple kindness of people who shared a community. I'd forgotten such generosity existed. I was making lunch when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Maxine standing on my porch, looking uncertain and cold. She was alone. What surprised me? Usually Norman accompanied her when she had something to say. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Hi, Elizabeth," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" "About everything. About how things went wrong." I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or just damage control. She looked tired, older than her 30 years, and there was something in her eyes that might have been actual regret. "I'm listening," I said. "Can I come in? It's cold out here." I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered my foyer, looking around what seemed to be genuine curiosity. "Your house is beautiful." "Thank you." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. I didn't offer coffee or invite her to sit. This was her conversation to have. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally, "for how we treated you, for the garage, for excluding you, for everything." "Okay," I said. She waited for more, but I had nothing to add. Her apology was noted, not accepted or rejected, just acknowledged. "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry." "You're not?" "No, I'm indifferent." The word hit her like a physical blow. I could see her processing it, realizing that indifference was somehow worse than anger. "I don't understand." "Anger means I still care about your opinion of me." "I don't." "But we're family." "You made it clear for 3 years that I wasn't really family. I was a financial safety net with a pulse." That's not how we saw it." "That's exactly how you saw it. And it's fine. I understand now that I was expecting something from you that you weren't capable of giving. We can change. We want to make this right." "There's nothing to make right. You are who you are, and I am who I am. We're just not compatible."
Compassionate. She stared at me, and I could see her calculating, trying to find the right words to fix a situation that couldn't be fixed. "Norman's miserable," she said finally. "He really misses you. I'm sure he misses having a financial backup plan." "It's not about money, isn't it? When was the last time he called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time either of you invited me to dinner or included me in your lives in any way that didn't involve me giving you something?" She opened her mouth and closed it. We both knew the answer. "I have a life now," I said gently, "a good life. I'm not interested in going backward." After she left, I stood in my foyer and felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete emotional freedom. Not the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but the peaceful clarity of someone who'd finally stopped trying to force love where it didn't exist. Outside, the snow continued falling, blanketing the world in fresh possibility. I had nowhere to go, nothing to prove, no one to please but myself. For the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came the kind of renewal I hadn't felt in decades. My herb garden had flourished through the winter in my sunny kitchen window, and now I was transplanting basil and rosemary into the small plot behind my townhouse. The soil was rich and dark, nothing like the concrete I'd stared at for 3 years. I was on my knees, hands deep in the earth, when I heard the familiar sound of Norman's truck in my driveway. But this time, there were two vehicles. Through the side gate, I could see Anna's silver minivan as well. They're coordinating now, I thought with detached interest, a united front. I continued planting, taking my time with each seedling. The sun was warm on my shoulders, and I could hear birds singing in the maple tree that shaded my small yard. Let them wait. Let them wonder if I was home. Let them experience the uncertainty of not knowing if they were welcome. The doorbell rang. I ignored it. It rang again, followed by knocking. Then I heard Anna's voice. "Mom, we know you're here. We can see you through the gate." I stood slowly, brushing soil from my hands. Through the wooden slats, I could see both my children standing on my front porch, looking uncertain and somehow smaller than I remembered. Norman held a manila envelope. Anna clutched a small gift bag. I walked to the front door and opened it, but remained in the doorway. "Hello," I said simply. "Mom," Norman said, his voice carefully controlled, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About us, about the family, about fixing this." I looked at them, my son and daughter, both in their 40s, both looking like children who had been caught breaking something valuable. Anna's eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. Norman's jaw was tight with the kind of tension I recognized from his childhood when he was trying not to lose his temper. "I'm listening," I said. "Can we come in?" Anna asked. "Please." I stepped aside, and they entered my foyer with the careful movements of people walking into unfamiliar territory. They looked around my home with expressions I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or recognition that this was a real life, not a temporary situation. "Your house is beautiful, Mom," Anna said, and there was something in her voice that sounded like genuine surprise. "Thank you." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. I didn't offer coffee or invite them to sit. This was their conversation to have. Norman cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been doing some thinking about everything, about how we treated you." "Okay. We want to make things right." "What does that mean?" He opened the manila envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. "We want to pay you back for the money you used to save the house, with interest." I looked at the papers without taking them. "Where did you get that kind of money?" "We refinanced," Anna said. "Both of us. It wasn't easy, but we managed it. And we want to finish the garage properly," Norman added. "Turn it into a real apartment. You can move back, have your own space, but still be close to family." I stared at them, feeling something that might have been pity. They still didn't understand. They thought this was about money, about accommodation, about fixing the practical problems instead of addressing the fundamental issue. "I don't want the garage," I said quietly. "Then we'll build you something else," Norman said desperately. "A little house in the backyard, whatever you want." "I don't want anything in your backyard." "But we're family." "No," I said, and the word came out sharper than I'd intended. "We're related. That's not the same thing." Anna's face crumpled. "Mom, please. We know we made mistakes." "You didn't make mistakes," I said. "You made choices. For 3 years, you chose to ignore me, exclude me, and treat me like an inconvenience. Those weren't accidents." "We can change," Norman said. "We want to change." "Because you're afraid of losing your financial safety net." "Because we love you," Anna said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I looked at her, really looked at her, my daughter who'd inherited my green eyes and my stubborn chin, who had been a bright, empathetic child and had grown into a woman who could ignore her mother's suffering for 3 years. "If you love me," I said quietly, "why did it take you 6 months to notice I was gone?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them processing the question, realizing they had no good answer. "We were taking you for granted," Norman said finally. "We know that now." "Yes, you were. And now you're panicking because you've realized I'm not coming back." "Are you?" Anna asked, and there was something desperate in her voice. "Are you ever coming back?" I looked around my foyer at the life I'd built in the past few months.
Tomorrow, Helen and I were driving to the botanical gardens. This weekend, the book club was having a potluck dinner. Next month, I was starting a volunteer position at the literacy center. I'm back. I'm back to being myself. But about us? Norman asked. And there it was. The question that had always been at the center of our relationship. What about us? What about their needs, their comfort, their security? What about you? We need you, Mom. You need my money. You need my availability. You need the security of knowing I'll always be there to catch you if you fall. But you don't need me. That's not true. When was the last time you called just to hear my voice? When was the last time you asked about my day, my health, my happiness? When was the last time you considered what I might need instead of what you needed from me? The questions hung in the air between us. I could see them struggling, trying to find examples that would prove me wrong, but we all knew the truth. We can do better, Anna said finally. We want to do better. I'm sure you do, but I'm not interested in being your practice dummy while you learn how to treat people with basic human dignity. Norman's face flushed. Mom, that's not fair. We're trying to apologize. You're trying to manage a crisis. There's a difference. So what? Anna said, her voice rising. You're just going to cut us out of your life forever? I'm not cutting you out. I'm just not making you the center of my universe anymore. But we're your children. And you'll always be my children. But being my children doesn't give you the right to treat me badly and expect me to be grateful for it. I walked to the door and opened it. I have plans this afternoon. They stood in my foyer, looking lost and somehow smaller than when they'd arrived. The confident adults who thought they could fix everything with money and promises had been replaced with confused children who'd suddenly realized their mother was a real person with feelings and agency. Mom, Norman said, cracking slightly, please don't do this. I'm not doing anything to you, I said gently. I'm just living my life. Without centering my life around you. There's a difference. Anna stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, I said. You can only decide how you want to move forward. What does that mean? It means if you want a relationship with me, you're welcome to call, to visit, to be part of my life, but you don't get to control it anymore. And if we don't? I looked at her, this daughter I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete emotional freedom. Then you don't, I said simply. After they left, I returned to my garden and continued planting. The soil was warm and rich, and the herbs would grow strong here. I could already imagine the meals I'd cook with fresh basil, the tea I'd make from mint from my own garden. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. Still on for the botanical gardens tomorrow? I typed back, wouldn't miss it. As the sun set over my small yard, I sat in the chair I'd placed among the herbs.
I watered the herbs and felt something I'd almost forgotten. Contentment. Not the desperate happiness that came from other people's approval, but the quiet satisfaction of a life lived on my own terms. Norman and Anna would have to decide what kind of relationship they wanted with me. They could choose to see me as a person worthy of respect and consideration, or they could choose to see me as an inconvenience to be managed. Either way, I would be fine. I had my warm house, my chosen family, my garden full of growing things. I had discovered that the woman I'd been in the garage, cold, desperate, grateful for scraps, hadn't been my true self. She'd been someone I'd created to survive an impossible situation. The woman I actually was had her own home, her own friends, her own life. She didn't need anyone's permission to exist, and she certainly didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. The last light faded from my garden, and I went inside my house,
and closed the door behind me. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new growth, new reasons to be grateful for the life I'd finally claimed as my own. And if my children wanted to be part of that life, they would have to earn their place in it, just like everyone else. The garage years were over. The real life had begun.